February 2022, midnight. Leicester, England. Headlights blur through the dark as two cars race at over 100 miles per hour, a deadly chase born from jealousy, secrets, and the hunger for image. A TikTok star once adored for her confidence and style now stood accused of murder. Mahek Bukhari, known online as Maybe, had gone from viral fame to viral infamy. How could a world built on filters, likes, and validation lead to such real-world destruction? This wasn't a story of greed or rage alone, it was about ego, exposure, and the illusion of control. They smiled for the camera, even as their lives spiraled into lies, betrayal, and violence. Inside UK female influencers who went from social media fame to prison. Welcome to UK Real Crime, where Britain's digital idols fall from glamour to guilt, and their hidden crimes are finally unmasked. Today, we dive into the shocking real-life cases of women who turned online influence into criminal downfall, from TikTok tragedies to OnlyFans obsession, from deception to murder. What you're about to hear may stay with you long after the screen fades to black. Because in the age of followers and fame, not every influencer lives to tell their story. First offender, Mahek Bukhari. What began as a feud over secrets and reputation ended in fire and death on a dark English highway, a story that tore apart the illusion of online fame and loyalty. Mahek Bukhari was 25, a rising TikTok influencer known to her followers as Maybe. Behind her confident videos was a turbulent secret. Her mother, 46-year-old Ansreen Bukhari, had been having an affair with 1-year-old Saqib Hussain. When she tried to end it, Hussain demanded £3,000 and threatened to expose explicit videos of their relationship. Rather than turn to the police, Mahek promised to handle it. "I'll make sure he gets jumped," she texted a friend. Prosecutors later called her utterly self-obsessed, consumed by the fear of public shame and the loss of her influencer image. On the night of 11 February 2022, Mahek and Ansreen joined 6 others in a Tesco car park in Leicester, luring Hussain into what he thought was a peaceful meeting. He brought along his friend, 1-year-old Mohammed Hashim Ijazuddin, unaware he was driving into a trap. When the men saw masked figures approaching, they panicked and sped away. 2 cars, an Audi TT with Mahek and Ansreen inside, and a Seat Leon driven by their associates, chased them down the A46 at speeds over 100 miles per hour. As their Skoda Fabia swerved wildly, Saqib made a desperate 999 call. "They're trying to kill me," he cried. "We're being rammed. I'm going to die." Seconds later, the line went silent. The Skoda hit a tree, split in 2, and burst into flames. Both men were killed instantly. None of the pursuers stopped. CCTV later showed the group strolling through a quiet cul-de-sac, apparently planning their cover story. When police discovered the wreckage around 1:30 a.m., the burned remains told a story of deliberate murder, confirmed by the haunting 999 recording. Detectives arrested Mahek and her accomplices within hours. She claimed they were on their way to Nottingham for a social media event, but evidence soon dismantled the lie. Phone data, CCTV, and car telemetry revealed a coordinated ambush. When officers played her the 999 call, Mahek appeared briefly shaken before dismissing it as Saqib lying again. At Leicester Crown Court, prosecutors called it a story of love, obsession, and extortion. After a lengthy trial, the jury convicted Mahek and Ansreen, along with 2 men, of double murder. On 1 September 2023, Judge Timothy Spencer KC handed down life sentences, 31 years and 8 months for Mahek, and 26 years and 9 months for Ansreen. "This was cold-blooded murder," the judge said. "Your tawdry fame made you think you were untouchable." The victims' families gave emotional statements. "They left my son and his friend to burn in a furnace of hell," said Hashim Ijazuddin's father. The 999 call was described as one of the most distressing pieces of evidence ever heard in a British courtroom. The case went viral online, irony not lost on those who once followed Mahek's glamorous life. Old TikToks of her laughing and posing were played alongside court footage of her standing still and expressionless. While awaiting her verdict, she played board games in custody. When the sentence came, she showed little emotion. Her once thriving social media account, frozen but not deleted, became a ghostly relic of a life built on illusion. Now, the mother and daughter serve their time separately. Mahek is reportedly considering an appeal, while Ansreen remains withdrawn. The story of their downfall has become a grim warning about the power, and peril of social media fame. The tragedy of the Bukharis highlights more than jealousy or fear. It exposes how ego and online validation can warp judgment. Behind curated filters, the pressure to appear perfect can turn insecurity into rage and a moment's decision into lifelong destruction. From this case, emerge painful truths. Never let pride or exposure drive your choices. Silence cannot erase guilt. Never let online status cloud your humanity, and never mistake loyalty for justification. What began as a secret spiraled into murder and ruin. Beneath the shimmer of fame, this case reminds us that influence without integrity leads only to loss. No amount of followers can outweigh the value of a single human life. Second offender, Abigail White. What began as another argument between lovers inside a modest home in Kingswood ended in a single, fatal stab, a moment that would expose the dark side of obsession and jealousy behind the polished world of social media. Abigail White, a 4-year-old OnlyFans model known online as Fake Barbie, was living a double life. To her thousands of followers, she projected confidence, glamour, and control. But behind closed doors, her relationship with 2-year-old Bradley Lewis was anything but perfect. The pair shared 3 children and a toxic, violent history, marked by manipulation and emotional volatility. White's online persona thrived on attention. Her private life spiraled under its weight. Their relationship had collapsed long before that night. Friends described how Lewis often sought refuge at his mother's home after arguments, once calling a friend in tears, pleading, "Help me, she's trying to kill me." In the weeks leading up to his death, White had stabbed him in the arm during another confrontation. Yet, despite the violence, Lewis kept returning, a pattern common in abusive relationships. On the 25th of March 2022, they met in a park where Lewis told her it was finally over. That night, they joined friends at a local pub. Witnesses recalled White drinking heavily, wine, rum, and even cocaine, before the situation escalated. She shouted at Bradley, slapped him, spat at a friend, and threw a drink at another man. As they left, Lewis's friends warned him not to go home with her. He replied quietly, "I'm dead when I get home." Minutes later, inside their house on Chipperfield Drive, Bradley Lewis was attacked. White stormed into the kitchen, grabbed a large carving knife, and plunged it into his chest. The blade pierced his heart, 7 centimeters deep. Neighbors rushed in after hearing her screams, finding Lewis lying in the hallway as White cried hysterically that he had stabbed himself. Paramedics arrived, but he was pronounced dead hours later in hospital. When questioned by detectives, White first claimed she never meant to harm him, only to shock him. Later, she admitted to stabbing him, but insisted it was accidental. Police investigators, however, had recovered damning evidence. Voice notes she'd sent to friends earlier that day saying she was fully capable of killing him. Detective Inspector Ben Lavender described her claim of self-defense as a cruel lie. The case painted a disturbing portrait of a woman whose need for control and validation turned lethal. Court psychiatrists later confirmed White suffered from borderline personality disorder, a condition that magnified her fear of abandonment and emotional instability. Her defense argued this disorder diminished her responsibility. Prosecutors disagreed, calling her actions deliberate, not impulsive. At Bristol Crown Court, White appeared calm and detached, dressed neatly, her platinum hair framing an expression of defiance. She pleaded guilty to manslaughter, but denied murder. The jury was unconvinced. After deliberation, they found her guilty of murder, rejecting her claim of diminished responsibility. On the 21st of October 2022, Mr. Justice Fraser KC sentenced her to life imprisonment with a minimum term of 18 years. He told the court that she had shown a pattern of violence and noted her attempt to blame Lewis for his own death. The judge was particularly disturbed that the murder took place while her 3-year-old son, Logan Layton, was in the house. The child later told investigators, "Mummy stabbed Daddy." As the sentence was read, White remained expressionless, a stark contrast to the distraught relative sitting a few feet away. Outside the courthouse, Bradley's father, Steve Lewis, said, "We've been given a life sentence too. Nothing will ever replace Bradley." More than 800 mourners attended the young father's funeral, a reflection of the community's heartbreak and anger. Months into her sentence, from HMP Eastwood Park, White wrote to a prisoner's magazine, complaining that women should be allowed conjugal visits. The letter sparked outrage, seen by many as proof she had learned little from her crime. The case ignited national discussion about domestic violence, gendered perceptions of abuse, and the influence of social media in distorting self-image. Abigail White's story became a grim reminder that behind the filters and fame, unchecked rage can destroy everything. Her world, once filled with lights, cameras, and curated perfection, now exists behind prison walls. And, in the silence of her cell, the woman who once thrived on attention faces a reality she can no longer edit. The truth of what happened that night remains unfiltered, one fatal moment of rage that ended 2 lives forever. Third offender, Jemma Mitchell. In one of the most chilling murder cases in modern Britain, a woman who presented herself as a spiritual healer turned out to be a meticulous killer, driven not by rage, but by greed. Jemma Mitchell, a 8-year-old from North London, was known among acquaintances as a calm and deeply religious woman. She spoke of enlightenment, energy, and healing. But behind the soft voice and spiritual persona was a simmering obsession with money and control. Her victim was 7-year-old Mi Kuen Chong, affectionately called Deborah, a devout Christian who had once considered Mitchell a friend. Their bond, built through church circles, would end in betrayal, dismemberment, and death. The story began with a promise. Deborah Chong, who suffered from schizophrenia and relied on medication, had offered to help Mitchell repair her crumbling £4 million family home by lending her £200,000, but as time passed, Deborah withdrew the offer, a decision that proved fatal. Investigators later concluded this sudden change triggered Mitchell's murderous plan. She wanted Deborah's money, and when generosity failed, she turned to violence. On the 11th of June 2021, CCTV captured Mitchell arriving at Deborah's modest Wembley home. In her hand, she carried a large blue suitcase, one that would later become a symbol of her cold calculation. For more than 4 hours, Mitchell remained inside. What happened next was brutal. Prosecutors said she struck Deborah on the head, fracturing her skull and killing her instantly. When she finally emerged, the suitcase appeared heavier, stretched by the weight of the body now concealed within. Mitchell walked calmly toward her car, dragging the suitcase behind her, and returned to her Willesden home, where she lived with her elderly mother. Over the following 2 weeks, she stored the decapitated remains in the garden, hiding them from view. When questioned by Deborah's lodger, she lied, claiming her friend had gone to visit the ocean. But the truth was far darker. On June 26, Mitchell rented a car using a phone stolen from a deceased neighbor, a move that later became critical evidence. She loaded the suitcase into the boot and drove over 200 miles to Salcombe, a quiet seaside town in Devon. Along the way, the car broke down. A mechanic who came to help later reported a strange, musty smell coming from the vehicle. After repairs, Mitchell continued her journey and dumped the body near a woodland trail. The next day, holidaymakers discovered Deborah's headless corpse near Bennett Road. She had been redressed in oversized clothing, as though Mitchell wanted to disguise her identity. Deborah's skull was found days later, a few meters from the body. The investigation quickly turned toward Mitchell. When detectives searched her home, they found Deborah's financial papers, a forged will leaving Mitchell 95% of her friend's estate, and a blood-stained towel bearing Deborah's DNA. Her background in human sciences, including the dissection of human cadavers, revealed a disturbing familiarity with anatomy, a detail the judge would later describe as a skill that served her in death. Arrested on July 6, Mitchell refused to speak. She offered no explanation, no remorse. Even in court, she stood still and silent as the evidence piled against her. CCTV footage, DNA traces, forged documents, and the testimony of experts who described her behavior as methodical and chilling. At the Old Bailey, the jury took just 7 hours to convict her of murder. On the 28th of October 2022, Judge Richard Marks KC handed down a life sentence with a minimum term of 34 years. He called her crime devious and despicable, committed against a vulnerable woman who trusted you. Mitchell became the first woman in England and Wales to be sentenced live on television, a historic but haunting moment that gripped viewers nationwide. Detective Chief Inspector Jim Eastwood described her as an evil woman, motivated purely by greed. Outside the courtroom, Deborah's family watched the verdict from Malaysia, their grief magnified by the cruelty of the act. "I can't sleep," said her sister Amy. "I keep asking how she suffered before she died." In the footage from the courtroom, Mitchell stood expressionless, the same calm facade she once used to convince others she could heal souls. But her serenity now carried a new meaning, the cold detachment of someone who took a life for profit. Today, she serves her sentence in a women's prison, Her case remembered as one of Britain's most shocking examples of calculated murder. It reminds us that evil often hides in plain sight, behind charm, intellect, and the quiet mask of faith. Sometimes, the most dangerous people are those who pretend to heal your wounds while planning how to profit from your pain. Fourth offender, Farah Damji. For nearly 3 decades, one woman's name has surfaced again and again in British courtrooms, not for one crime, but for a relentless pattern of lies, manipulation, and cruelty. Farah Damji, now 56, has been called many things by judges and journalists alike: a fraudster, a stalker, and even London's most dangerous woman. But to those who've crossed her path, she is something worse: a master manipulator who destroys lives for sport. Born in Uganda and raised in privilege, Damji was once described as charming, cultured, and brilliant. But beneath the sophistication lay something darker: an unrestrained ego and a pathological need for control. Her criminal career began in the 1990 seconds in New York, where she ran an art gallery and mingled with the wealthy. When her debts mounted, she forged a judge's signature to reclaim seized goods and was jailed for grand larceny. 6 months later, she fled while on probation. It was a pattern that would repeat itself: charm, con, escape, and reoffend. By the early 2000s, Damji was back in London, reinventing herself as a socialite and entrepreneur. But her scams continued. She stole credit cards, forged documents, and even impersonated Crown Prosecution Service officials to derail her own trial. In 2005, she was sentenced to 3.5 years in prison for multiple counts of fraud, totaling £50,000. Upon release, she reinvented herself again, this time as a writer and campaigner for prison reform. But the hypocrisy was staggering. While preaching rehabilitation, she continued to harass, deceive, and stalk those who trusted her. In 2016, Damji's crimes turned personal. After a brief romantic encounter with an engineer, she launched a campaign of terror when he rejected her. Over months, she made more than 180 hoax calls and text messages, fabricated abuse allegations against his wife, and sent threats referencing the couple's 6-year-old daughter. She was sentenced to 5 years in prison for stalking, yet even behind bars, she found ways to manipulate the system, filing complaints, claiming mistreatment, and demanding special privileges. Her release did not end the chaos. In 2020, she breached restraining orders by creating online accounts to defame a police officer who had investigated her, accusing him falsely of fraud and stalking. When the case went to trial, she absconded, fleeing the country to Ireland and living under the name Noor Hiham. There, she fought extradition for 2 years, claiming she would not receive adequate mental health care in British prisons. The Irish Supreme Court eventually rejected her appeal, and she was returned to the UK in 2022. Less than a year after her release in 2023, Damji struck again. Using the alias Noor, she began dating diplomat Dr. Nigel Gould-Davies. Within weeks, the relationship turned toxic. When he tried to end it, she stole his passport, fabricated financial claims, and bombarded him with threatening messages. Her manipulation escalated into stalking and fraud, culminating in her arrest at Heathrow Airport in March 2024. During the 2025 trial, prosecutors described Damji as a woman for whom deception is as natural as breathing. The court heard how she had faked illnesses, staged breakdowns, and used her diagnosis of borderline personality disorder to evade accountability. Her barristers argued that her mental health issues and history of trauma explained her actions, but the judge was unconvinced. On the 11th of July 2025, at Southwark Crown Court, Judge Michael Gledhill KC sentenced Damji to 6 years in prison for stalking, theft, and fraud. His words were cutting. "You have absolutely no respect for anyone but yourself. You treat other people as pieces on a chessboard, to be used, moved, or destroyed at your convenience." He added that her actions were flagrant, vindictive, and cruel, and that her repeated offending showed she was incapable of change. As the sentence was read, Damji stood motionless, her expression as unreadable as ever. To the public, she remains a symbol of a rare but chilling kind of criminal, one whose violence lies not in physical force, but in psychological domination. Her victims, some now suffering from PTSD, have described years of fear and humiliation. "She tried to destroy my life," said one man. "Every message, every lie was calculated." Farah Damji's life is a portrait of wasted brilliance, a woman who could have built a career in art, activism, or media, but instead chose deceit as her craft. She manipulated systems, exploited sympathy, and weaponized charm until the walls finally closed in. And as she serves her sentence in a London prison, her story leaves behind one haunting truth: that evil doesn't always wear a mask of rage. Sometimes it hides behind intelligence, confidence, and a smile. In a world obsessed with appearances, it is not always the loudest that we should fear, but the ones who quietly twist reality for their own gain. Fifth offender, Hayley Matthews. Edinburgh, July 2024. In the heart of Scotland's capital, a once familiar face from television sat silent in the dock, no longer delivering the news, but becoming it. Hayley Matthews, a former BBC and STV presenter, was about to face justice for a betrayal that struck at the most sacred human bond: trust between a daughter and her dying mother. At 45 years old, Matthews had lived a life many envied. She'd built a career in broadcasting, enjoyed public recognition, and cultivated an image of warmth and compassion. But beneath that public persona was a woman living beyond her means, increasingly desperate to sustain a lifestyle her fading career could no longer afford. Her mother, Janice Matthews, was frail and suffering from vascular dementia. When Hayley was granted power of attorney in late 2019, she was legally entrusted with her mother's finances. Instead, she saw it as an opportunity. Over the next 3 years, Matthews drained more than £120,000 from her mother's accounts, a theft carried out not with violence, but with calculated precision. Bank records showed 371 PayPal transactions amounting to over £46,000, alongside £38,000 in cash withdrawals. There were Amazon splurges, luxury handbags, and shopping trips to Harvey Nichols and the White Company. Among the purchases was a £1,371 Mulberry bag, a symbol of vanity bought with money meant for a woman who could no longer remember her own name. While Janice was hospitalized and later moved into care, her daughter was using her savings to fund a life of comfort. When Janice died in 2021, Hayley told her sister that the estate was worth only £36,000, a shocking figure given that just 2 years earlier, their mother had received more than £130,000 from the sale of the family home. Suspicion took hold. Danielle Thompson, Hayley's sister, requested the bank statements herself. What she found confirmed her worst fears: massive cash withdrawals, online purchases, and a pattern of spending that began the very month their mother entered hospital. When Danielle confronted Hayley, the former presenter finally confessed, not with remorse, but resignation. "I've been shocking at handling Mum's money," she texted. "I've spent what I shouldn't. It's all gone." Her father, Alistair, was heartbroken. For him, the betrayal was twofold: the loss of his former wife's financial legacy and the moral collapse of his daughter. When police were called, Hayley tried to justify her spending, claiming some of the funds went to gifts for hospital staff and clothes for her partner. None of it was true. The investigation revealed a woman who knew exactly what she was doing. Forensic accountants traced every transaction, each a small but deliberate act of deception. By the time she was arrested in January 2023, the money was gone, spent, squandered, and irretrievable. At Edinburgh Sheriff Court, Matthews pleaded guilty to embezzlement. Her defense argued she was under personal stress, caring for her child and struggling financially, but the judge rejected the notion that desperation excused deceit. Sheriff Alison Sterling called the theft a deliberate and repeated abuse of trust over 3 years, and said the only fitting punishment was custody. On the 25th of July 2024, Hayley Matthews was sentenced to 2 years and 3 months in prison. As the sentence was read, she appeared composed, her eyes fixed forward, her face drained of the confidence once seen on television. The courtroom was silent as her sister wept, later describing how the theft had shattered what was left of our family. Outside court, prosecutors condemned the crime as a gross betrayal of responsibility. She stole thousands from a vulnerable woman and used it to fund an extravagant lifestyle, said Fiscal Deputy Lynn Barry. The public's reaction was equally unforgiving. News outlets that once covered Matthews' celebrity now replayed images of her being led from court, her career and credibility destroyed. To many, the case was a sobering example of how power and greed can twist even family bonds. For others, it was a warning about how easily the elderly, especially those suffering from dementia, can become invisible victims in plain sight. Today, from her prison cell, the former presenter who once spoke for a nation has fallen silent. Her mother's voice, lost to illness, can no longer speak of the betrayal that followed. And perhaps that silence is the harshest sentence of all. When trust dies at the hands of greed, there is no redemption, only the echo of what love was meant to protect. Sixth offender, Samantha Jade Cooks. Cork, March 2025. It began with a story designed to stir compassion, a young woman facing a slow, incurable disease, fighting not only for her life, but for dignity in a world that often fails the disabled. Online, she was known as Carrie Jade Williams, a brave voice for accessibility. But behind the sympathy, behind the tearful TikToks and touching essays, was one of the most audacious frauds Ireland and the UK had ever seen. The woman's real name was Samantha Jade Cooks, a 35-year-old from Gloucestershire, England, a career con artist who had spent over a decade reinventing herself under at least 5 different names. She wasn't dying, she wasn't disabled. She was a skilled manipulator who weaponized illness, empathy, and social media for profit. Cook's deception was astonishing in its reach. Beginning in 2020, she told Irish welfare authorities she suffered from Huntington's disease, a degenerative neurological condition that slowly destroys the body and mind. She claimed she could barely write, climb stairs, or shower alone. To anyone who questioned her, she explained that the pandemic had made it impossible to see specialists or undergo genetic testing. She played the part perfectly, frail, articulate, and inspirational. Her story spread fast. Online, Carrie Jade became a viral figure. In 2022, one of her TikTok videos, in which she tearfully claimed Airbnb guests were suing her for €450,000 after being traumatized by her disability, sparked outrage worldwide. Supporters flooded her with sympathy and donations under the hashtag #ThisWorldCanBeAccessible. She was even celebrated in literary circles, winning a prestigious award for an essay about her supposed terminal illness. Behind the camera, though, she was collecting over €60,000 in disability payments from the Irish state, all based on lies. But this wasn't Cook's first deception. In the past, she had defrauded a British couple seeking a surrogate mother, conned parents of autistic children with fake therapies, and stolen money meant for charity trips. Each time, she vanished and resurfaced under a new name: Lucy Hart, Rebecca Fitzgerald, Lucy Fitzwilliam. The pattern was always the same: trust, exploit, disappear. The facade began to crumble when her story reached the media's attention once more. A journalist investigating her viral TikTok noticed inconsistencies in her background and traced her back to old fraud cases in the UK. The truth came crashing down. Carrie Jade Williams did not exist. On the 12th of July 2024, Gardaí arrested her outside a post office in Tralee, where she was still collecting welfare under her fake identity. Investigators soon uncovered the scale of her deception. Medical records revealed she had never undergone a single scan or test to confirm her diagnosis. Welfare documents showed 238 false payments, sustained over 4 years. The doctor who signed her forms, an unwitting accomplice, later told police she appeared genuine, articulate, and frail. She had exploited even the pandemic to her advantage, claiming travel restrictions prevented her from attending appointments. When questioned, Cooks was defiant. She claimed she suffered from psychosis and couldn't be held responsible, but Judge Ronan Munro dismissed this as another manipulation, describing her actions as a calculated exploitation of public sympathy. Her intent, the court concluded, was simple: to defraud the system and profit from people's kindness. At Tralee Circuit Criminal Court, Cooks pleaded guilty to multiple counts of deception and theft. On the 8th of March 2025, she was sentenced to 3 years in prison, with 1 year suspended on condition she seek treatment upon release. Judge Munro described her as highly intelligent, deeply manipulative, and devoid of genuine remorse. Today, she is serving her sentence at Limerick Prison, reportedly studying sociology and calligraphy while under investigation for additional theft and fraud offences. In court, she showed no emotion as the sentence was handed down, her once carefully crafted mask stripped away. The public reaction was fierce. Families affected by Huntington's disease condemned her for turning genuine suffering into a performance. Parents who had trusted her in earlier scams described trauma and sleepless nights, some fearing she would reappear under another identity. One victim said, "She didn't just steal money, she stole belief that kindness means something." Media coverage exploded across platforms, from investigative podcasts to BBC documentaries exposing the dark psychology of online deception. The woman once celebrated as an inspirational figure became a symbol of digital-era manipulation where empathy can be engineered, monetized, and betrayed. Now, in her quiet cell, Samantha Cooks, the self-proclaimed terminal warrior, faces the one reality she can't fake: accountability. Her story stands as a haunting testament to the power of lies wrapped in virtue and to how, in the age of influence, truth itself has become a currency to be stolen. When empathy is weaponized for greed, the wound it leaves is deeper than deceit. It erodes our faith in compassion itself. Seventh offender, Michaella McCollum. Lima, Peru, August 2013. Under the harsh fluorescent lights of Jorge Chávez International Airport, two young women stood motionless as officers sliced open their suitcases. Inside lay more than 11 kilograms of cocaine, neatly packed into porridge sachets. Within moments, Michaella McCollum from Northern Ireland and Melissa Reid from Scotland would become international headlines as the Peru 2, a story that blended youthful recklessness, manipulation, and global crime. Michaella McCollum was just 20 when she left her small hometown of Dungannon to chase the summer party life in Ibiza. She worked in bars and clubs, surrounded by a world of fast money, easy drugs, and promises that glittered brighter than they were. At a barbecue one night, high on LSD, she met a man named Davey, who offered her $5,000 for what he described as a quick delivery job. It seemed simple, no questions, just travel, drop off a package, and return. But the job would send her across the world into one of South America's most dangerous drug corridors. McCollum thought she was headed to Barcelona, then Mallorca. Instead, her ticket led to Peru, a country she later admitted she didn't even realize was in South America. There, she met Melissa Reid, another young woman caught in the same trap. For days, they pretended to be tourists in Lima, waiting for instructions from the men who now controlled their every move. When the order came, they were handed 30 packages of cocaine hidden inside food containers. On the 6th of August 2013, they arrived at the airport for a flight to Madrid. Security officers quickly grew suspicious. The women's behavior was nervous, inconsistent. One officer took their bags aside. Within seconds, the illusion collapsed. As white powder spilled across the inspection table, McCollum later recalled hearing screaming and shouting, realizing she was no longer in real life. The cocaine they carried was worth £1.5 million on the European market. Initially, the women claimed they were kidnapped and forced into trafficking by an armed Spanish gang, but investigators doubted their story. They found inconsistencies in their timelines, and CCTV showed them moving freely through the airport. Under pressure and facing 15 years in prison, they both abandoned the kidnapping claim and pleaded guilty. On the 17th of December 2013, the court sentenced Michaella McCollum and Melissa Reid to 6 years and 8 months in prison. McCollum was sent to Lima's notorious Virgen de Fatima prison, and later to Ancon II, facilities infamous for overcrowding, violence, and disease. She shared a cramped cell with 7 other women, surviving on rice and stale bread, with cockroaches crawling over the floor. There were moments, she later said, when I truly thought I would never see the outside world again. But prison also became her turning point. McCollum learned Spanish, worked in the prison salon, cutting hair and doing nails, and began to read extensively. When Peruvian law changed in 2016, allowing early release for non-violent offenders, she became eligible for parole after serving just under 3 years. She returned to Dublin later that year, quietly rebuilding her life from the ruins of international infamy. In the years that followed, Michaella McCollum transformed herself from convicted smuggler to public figure. She published her memoir, You'll Never See Daylight Again, in 2020, offering a candid look into prison life and the manipulation that led her there. In 2023, she earned a business degree from Ulster University and later joined the cast of Celebrity Sass, Who Dares Wins, enduring brutal military-style challenges as a personal test of redemption. Still, her return to public life drew mixed reactions. Many admired her determination to change. Others accused her of profiting from crime. The families of drug victims criticized her newfound fame, while younger followers saw her as a cautionary voice. "I'm not asking for forgiveness," McCollum said in one interview. "I'm asking people to understand how one stupid decision can destroy your life." Her story also reignited debates about exploitation in international drug networks, how young, impressionable people are often targeted by traffickers who promise glamour and cash. As her case faded from the headlines, McCollum used her platform to warn others. Speaking to students and youth organizations, she outlined 3 crucial lessons. First, never underestimate how easily desperation or peer pressure can cloud judgment. Second, question opportunities that seem too good to be true, because they usually are. And third, remember that fear of admitting a mistake can trap you deeper than the mistake itself. Today, Michaella McCollum's life is far removed from the humid chaos of Lima Airport. She is a mother, a graduate, and a woman whose past will always shadow her future. Yet her story endures, not as a tale of glamour, but of consequence. One decision made in a moment of confusion can echo for a lifetime. The real sentence begins only when freedom is regained. Fame gave them followers, but it also gave them something far darker, the belief that image could erase consequence. From viral videos to courtroom verdicts, these women remind us how thin the line is between admiration and obsession, influence and illusion. Behind every filtered smile was a fracture waiting to break. But these are just a few of the stories hiding beneath Britain's digital spotlight. Many more remain untold: the next headline, the next downfall, the next betrayal disguised as beauty. If you want to uncover what really lies behind the UK's most shocking real crime cases, make sure to subscribe to UK Real Crime and hit the notification bell so you'll be first to witness the truth behind Britain's darkest scandals. Because in a world built on followers, it only takes one wrong choice to lose everything.